2003, we went into Iraq, right? In the January, I actually was in Israel and went into the West Bank and Gaza. And the hotel I stayed at in Tel Aviv was filled with American military. And it was just before the big push. But part of the work that I've done, because of my complete focus on family and children who are experiencing really serious problems in their everyday lives that are not the family's problem. This is social, it's economic, has to do with inequality, has to do with oppression. So part of the work that I was doing at that point was focusing on children who'd experienced mass trauma. So there's this huge shift into not simply looking at family, not simply looking at family and community or school, but looking at it in this much larger arena of conflict. And so I spent time in Israel visiting schools, spending time with families, and then went to Ramallah and crossed out into the West Bank, and on the second trip went to Gaza. So I've been to Gaza a few times and stayed in the refugee camp of Rafah and stayed with a Palestinian family in Ramallah, been under curfew, spent a lot of time with the children. Didn't know the family before I got there. I was trying to network so I could also not only meet Israeli families but Palestinian families, because my interest is children. This is not something that, some person arriving on a plane would have the audacity to suggest they could have an opinion about. Everything I do has to do with kids, and it doesn't matter where they come from. So I'm talking on the phone with this person from Ramallah that I had been put in touch with by some people in New York, and he said, "So, if you're spending time in Israel, why aren't you coming to the West Bank?" And he said, "To Palestine." And I said, "Well, I haven't got anywhere to stay there." And he said, "We have hotels." And I said, "Okay, so I'll come." And so he set up for a Palestinian taxi driver to pick me up at a hotel in Jerusalem and take me to the crossing. And it was before this particular crossing that's very close. Calandria is close to Ramallah. And he said he would meet me. And I said, "So how will I know you?" And he said he would have his son with him, who's 14. And he said, "But I will know you." And clearly, I am blonde, and I stuck out a little bit. And so I got out of the taxi, and the taxi driver said, I said, "Could you pick me up tomorrow, please?" And he said, "Just be here before 4 o'clock, because after 4 it's dangerous." So I met Omar and his son and went to their house, to their apartment, met all his family, his nephew, his children, and his nephew had waited because they'd already eaten. And so I ate with the nephew and then said, "So where am I staying?" And they kind of all looked at each other. I think they'd been checking me out, and they said, "Here." So they made up a bed, and I stayed with the family. And I went back and stayed with them multiple times, and I'm friends with them. So I was able to go to lots of schools in the West Bank as well as Israel, and eventually networked and walked into areas, across areas, into Gaza on my own. No one had been in for 3 months, and I went back 3 times, and finally they said okay. So I walked across on my own and was met by a teacher, and went to Rafa and visited schools there and spent time with them. But all of the time, the question is about trauma and how children are coping with living in an area that is very, very complicated and very dangerous. And that Israeli children too. It doesn't matter which side. I mean, if their rocket comes, it's still something that, although the conditions in Gaza are unimaginable, it is a terrible situation for children. 75% of the children have PTSD, and it isn't PTSD that some event has taken place and they can get over it. It is constant, and it's very hard to meet a family that hasn't lost somebody. It is a very, very complicated situation, and I don't think it's resolvable, certainly not in my lifetime. But we have to think about the children. And that was followed by, I'll just throw in Katrina.